Hey guys, this is the first video of the year, and this is for the Contract League. In this video, I'm going to be going through and breaking down exactly how the contracts work this season, just to make sure everybody has a good grasp of that. So, this year, our contracts are going to be done in Week 8. Everybody should already know that if you've been following the information in the GroupMe. But basically, this year, we've got a 3-year deal that we can sign, and we've never had that before. Last year, we had a 2-year deal, which isn't typical either. But we've all got players. Everybody has a single player that they have kept for one more year right now. So if we're going to run through the teams, I think I actually have these ones memorized, but let's see. This is Trev's team, Depressed Robot, and he has Metcalf in the 15th round. He has Metcalf in the 15th round next season, whether he decides to sign him to a new contract or not. He can sign him to a new contract, but if he doesn't, he will still have him in the 15th round next year. So, but only for that 1 year. So there are 2 different variables each year. The first variable is how many years can you sign a player to a contract for? It's always only one player you can sign, but the question is how many years. It could be 1, 2, or 3 players, and it's random. The next piece is, and this next part's 50-50, are you allowed to re-sign a player? And that means, are you allowed to sign a player that you did not draft this season, that you kept from a previous season? And that means 2 different things. That could either mean re-signing them, like changing their contract. So like, for example, if Trev decided to change Metcalf's deal from a 1 more year deal into a 3-year deal, like effectively overwriting that deal and keeping no other player this season, he could do that. That's one thing you could do. And the other thing that you could do is you could sign a player who just ran out of their contract. So like, for example, let's say it was next year, and if that toggle was on, if you were allowed to re-sign a player that year, then Trev could say, I'm going to re-sign Metcalf now for whatever the contract length is next season. So every year it's 50-50 if you can re-sign a player. Interestingly, we've randomized this every single year, and it's never come up that you cannot. But it is 50-50, so one of these days it's going to come around and not be allowed to re-sign a player. So with that in mind, you may want to consider whether you want to keep, if you have a really good keeper, you may want to consider whether you want to just go ahead and sign them to a longer deal, or if you want to have 2 players going into next season. But if you have an excellent keep, I would consider changing that keep from a 1-year keep into a 3-year keep. Anyways, let's take a look at people's drafts. We're going to go team by team. We'll look at the actual draft recaps, and we'll talk about who they could keep. This isn't going to be a super long video. I'm not going to go super in-depth with this, but I just want to make sure that everybody has a good idea, and I'll probably discuss 1 or 2 players, maybe 3 players from each team that would be a reasonable thing for them to keep. So let's take a look. We're going to start off. I guess we'll just go in order. So here's my team. I drafted Joe Mixon first, which was pretty exciting, but I got Josh Jacobs later. So anyways, I kept Godwin this past year for a 4th rounder, so I'll have him next season regardless, if I want to, in the 4th round again. And so I might keep Calvin Ridley if he plays really well, or Josh Jacobs in the 2nd round. I might do one of those. I could also keep Darren Waller in the 6th because it's a little bit later, or maybe even Mostert in the 7th. If I was really savage, maybe I'd do something like keeping Justin Tucker in the 11th. But remember, there's 2 things that have to be true. 3 things, actually. Number 1, the player has to be somebody that you drafted or kept this season. They can't be somebody that somebody else drafted. Number 2, the player has to be on your team in Week 8 when you decide who you're going to sign to a contract. And number 3, at the end of the season, the player has to be on your team as well. So as long as all 3 of those things are true, then you're able to sign them. And this year the toggle is yes, you may resign, and the contract length is 3 years. So just to detail my options, like if I decided to keep one of these other players like Jacobs or Ridley or Waller. Let's say I kept Waller. That might happen, actually. So let's say I kept Waller. If I did that, if I decided to sign him to a contract, I would have Chris Godwin for his 1-year deal still. He's got 1 year left on his deal with me. And then I would have Waller for 3 years. So I'd have Waller in the 6th slot for 3 years. So next season when we draft, I would have Chris Godwin in the 4 and Waller in the 6th. Or let's say I decided that I didn't want to actually do this because I liked Chris Godwin keep a lot. And then instead of doing anything else, I could say I'll change Chris Godwin's 1-year deal into a 3-year deal. So that could be something I could do as well. So either one of those things would make sense. I could also keep other different players, but you should select someone to keep regardless, even if you think you're not going to end up wanting any of the players, because at the beginning of the season, before the draft, you can always decide you're not going to actually have that player stay on your team. But once you do that, once you make that decision to knock them off of there, Then once we draft that season, it's not like you can go back and say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and keep them now. So anyways, that's the basics of it. Let's take a look at Sam's team really quick. Sam kept Chubb in the 12th round. Chubb's been awesome, but then he got hurt, so that'll be interesting. I suspect that he may go ahead and extend him, or he may decide to keep somebody like Gibson or Lamb or somebody else. He had a pretty good team, but he's been wrecked by injuries. Thomas, Prescott, and Chubb going down. So anyways, basically same thing again. He has Chubb kept next season. So if he doesn't do anything, or if he keeps somebody else, he'll still have Chubb for 1 year next season. In 12th round position, pretty awesome. Let's take a look at Holmes. Holmes kept Dalvin Cook for a second rounder, so he could do that again regardless, and maybe he'll keep Mark Andrews or Jonathan Taylor or J.K. Dobbins or something. He'll keep somebody and sign them to a 3-year deal as well, or he could overwrite Cook's deal and make it a 3-year deal. Rascal kept Melvin Gordon. She has him for 1 more year, and she can obviously sign any of her other players to a 3-year deal. And interestingly enough, in this league, you always sign the player for the same position that they were drafted. So if you look at somebody like Alvin Kamara, you could keep him. You could say, okay, I'll sign him for 3 years because he's really good running back. Or you could keep somebody like Parker, who's a deeper selection. So you have somebody in the 7th round, a pretty good wide receiver in the 7th round. She's also got Justin Jefferson, a rookie, in the 15th round. That Metcalf worked out really well for Trev, so maybe that's an interesting opportunity there as well. Let's take a look at Moneymaker. Moneymaker had Zeke in the 2nd round. That's his contract that's on there for another year, so I could see him going with McCaffrey or Golladay possibly, and just locking up 2 really good players. So yeah. Same thing though, he could change Zeke to a 3-year deal, or he could leave Zeke on his 1-year deal and also sign McCaffrey to a 3-year deal or Golladay to a 3-year deal. These would be some pretty powerful running backs to lock up, but then of course you don't have any of the ability to move around and decide to take a wide receiver in that 2nd round or something like that. So, all right, let's take a look at Justin's team. Justin absolutely ravaged with injuries this year. He's had Barkley hurt, Miles Sanders missed the first game, Julio's been out a bunch, A.J. Brown's been out a bunch. I mean, it's just been out of control for him. He's been absolutely wrecked with the injuries. So his player that he's been keeping forever is Julio Jones. I think he's actually had Julio Jones forever. Like, I think he got Julio Jones in the 3rd round the first year that we did this league. I think he drafted 1st overall and got him in the 3rd round, and he's kept him forever. Every time he's had a chance to re-sign him, he always has. And so, he may resign him to the 3-year deal, or he may decide to, he's already got him for next year anyways. He may decide to, grab somebody else like A.J. Brown or Lockett or Miles Sanders. I mean, I could see doing Saquon too, but since he got hurt, it's unclear about if it's going to be worth it to do something like that. He's got a late Deontay Johnson, but he's banged up too. Just a really injured roster. Let's take a look at Josh Hagan. So Josh Hagan had Eckler in the 7th round, who also got injured, so he's going to be on his team regardless next season. He can also extend him to a 3-year deal if he prefers, and he can also keep any of the other players. He could have any of these other guys on a contract as well, as long as he's got them on his team in Week 8. Let's go ahead and take a look at Matt's team. Matt has Juju Smith-Schuster for 1 more year, so he can keep him for free, and then he could extend him to a 3-year deal if he wanted, or he could put anybody else on a 3-year deal. Kittle looks like a standout, or Robinson, maybe Cam Akers or Swift if they got going. Henderson, if Henderson gets a hold of that job and he's still got him, that would be a good keep if he can get a hold of it. Probably one of these Cam or Henderson guys if one of them gets a good hold of the job. But either way, he's got some interesting options. And Kittle in the 2nd's fine. You can always just do that, right? Like, it's fine. So, anyways, he's going to have the option of changing Juju to a 3-year deal or adding a 3-year deal to any of the other guys and just keeping Juju for 1 more year. Let's take a look at Trev's team. We already mentioned about Trev's team that he's got the DK Metcalf in the 15th, and so next year he'll have that regardless, but he could decide if he wanted to extend him for 3 years, or he can keep him for 1 more year, and he can decide about which other player he wants to put on a 3-year deal. Let's go ahead and take a look at CJ's here. I know Katie actually does most of the work for this team. So they had Josh Allen in the 8th, and so they'll have him for 1 more year locked in. So they can keep somebody else if they want, or they can just extend him 3 years He's looking really good this season, so who knows what they'll do. And remember, too, next season, it'll be 50-50. So all these guys who are on the last year of their deal, there's still a 50% chance he'll be able to resign them anyways. So, like, take a look, for example, at Trev. Trev's got a really good keep, and actually, Sam's in the situation, too. So you got 15th round Metcalf, that's pretty nasty, and you've got Sam with the 12th round Chubb. Both those situations are ones where you'd say, okay, I want to re-sign this guy probably, and I'll just sacrifice the other player that I could keep, and I'll just have this guy extended. But if you sign somebody else, you still have a chance that you're going to be able to sign one of these guys next season. It's just 50-50. It's not 100%. And so therefore, you want to make sure you're aware of that when you make that choice, because you could gamble and try to get a great situation as opposed to being careful and then having a really good situation just. But it's a good problem to have. Definitely nice to be in a situation where you have a great keep, and pretty exciting. Let's take a look really quickly at the league itself. It's been interesting so far this season, and we've got a couple teams that Justin's usually pretty competitive, 0-5 this season with all his injuries. Matt's first year in the league, 1-4. And then aside from that, most of the teams are pretty competitive. I mean, Sam's team's been competitive. He's had some injuries too. And Josh Hagan's always a tough out. But if you look at the teams that have been doing the best easily, it's easy to talk about CJ's team and Trev's team doing the best easily. And then, really, it's kind of funny, last week, Moneymaker and the Rascal tied. So they have some of the best teams, too, and they tied, giving them that 3-1-1 record. Kind of interesting. But definitely a lot of space still. Remember, 6 teams are going to make the playoffs. So right now we have a 2-3 team. It's Sam currently, it looks like. And one other thing to remember is that in every league that I run, so in all the leagues that you guys are in that are with me, your actual breakers for making the playoffs are not just your points against. It's actually your points against plus your points for. But during the season, NFL.com doesn't know how to process having both of those as your breaker. And so we use the points against as your breaker during the season, and at the end of the season, your points for plus your points against. And what that means is you should always try to get as many points as you can. It also means that if people are running up the score against you, like Justin's got 600 points against, if he can recover somehow and get this team to a 7-6 or a 6-7 record, he's got a decent shot at making the playoffs because he's got this giant points against, but he'll also have to obviously start scoring some points for as well. You'll need both in order to get have the best breakers there. And if you end up having a draw, then your breakers won't matter as much except for against the person that you draw with, unless we end up with a second draw, which could be exciting but probably unlikely. So anyways, if you guys have any questions, be sure and reach out to me and ask me about your option, or like if you have a question about how something works, just get in touch and let me know. I'm going to be getting an idea of what everybody's going to be planning on keeping in the next week here, and then you can change that up until week 8. And during week 8, at some point, I'm going to lock it. I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to lock it tomorrow or something like that. And then after that, no more changing what the player is. And again, no matter who you pick, no matter who you decide to sign to a contract, no matter what, before every draft, every year, you can always decide, nope, I'm just going to throw that guy back. One year I decided to keep C.J. Anderson, and I believe I threw back Zach Ertz in the 14th round. And then he was horrible, and I didn't want to keep him the next year for like the 4th round pick, so I didn't. But you don't have to keep that player, but you won't be able to keep any other player except for the one that you signed. So you'll only be able to keep whatever people you've signed to contract, so you won't be able to like go back and find somebody else to keep on your team. So this decision will be kind of important, and it's fairly early in this season, and it's during this kind of COVID season that's kind of crazy, so everybody will just have to do the best they can. And pretty crazy, but looking forward to see what everybody does. I'm excited to report that I am 3-2 this time, which, I mean, this is probably my best start in this league ever. I have a lot of trouble in this league, and I'm not usually able to do very well. Last season, I made the playoffs 6-7, tied with 2 other teams. I got those breakers and was able to get in, so still did not win, but I got in there at least, which I usually have trouble doing. There are a lot of good players in this league, but some of them have hit with some really nasty injuries this season, so you never know what's going to happen. Trev hasn't been in this league before, but he's doing really well in both of the bigger leagues that I'm running this season. So we'll have to see if somebody can knock him off of his roost up there. All right, everybody. Until next time.